How do you join the Masons? Easy enough question, right? It was one that I had always thought about with my grandfather and where he had come from and kind of where his journey had led him. You see, he was a very stoic man that dedicated his life to a secret society called the Masons. And if you're not familiar with the Masons, they're also called the Masonic Society or the Illuminati. If you're a millennial, you understand that. If you're not, ask your millennial. That's what Jay-Z does. So I always wanted to find out what the inner workings of that society was so I can better understand my grandfather. He was the patriarch of my family, and he was the man that everybody looked up to. So of course, when I asked him that, his eyes lit up. And his answer was, "You sure as hell just did." And so for me, to hear that I had just joined the Masons was a little unnerving because I don't really feel like I fit in with the Masons. They're typically veterans, and they're typically a little older. And so the brevity of that situation set in when I was sitting in my first meeting and I was learning all of the ancient handshakes of the first degree. And it can be a little intimidating. And so after that first meeting, I went home and I kind of just started sitting there and collecting my thoughts and saying, is this really for me? Am I wanting to join a secret society? If you Google it, you can find out all those secrets, by the way, just saying. And so I went home and I started looking through my notes and I started really thinking about it. And the one thing I failed to do was communicate to my grandfather that maybe this wasn't for me. So I get a call one day from my grandmother. This is months later. I had actually forgotten about it. And the tone in her voice was, I guess you could say, concerned. Because for my grandfather, this was the greatest thing, that his grandson wanted to join the secret society that he had dedicated his life to. For my grandmother, I'm sure she had heard about it all the time, but my grandfather wasn't one to pry. He wasn't one to push someone in a direction they didn't want to go. So for me, my answer was, I just don't think it's for me, and I haven't really been studying. And her sigh afterwards kind of told the whole story. But to me, it was years that I could be taking part in this. I mean, I was only 25 at the time, and why couldn't I join when I was 40 or when I was, older than that? I don't know. I was 25. And I guess the situation kind of took a turn for the worst when my grandfather was combing his hair that month and hit a tumor in his brain, and he collapsed. And when you see your heroes become human, I mean, that's a very, very grave circumstance. And so everything stopped at that moment, and I realized, wow, maybe I don't have all this time to make my grandfather proud, but even furthermore, maybe I don't have all this time just to spend time with my grandfather. So I dropped everything. I went out to Pahrump, which is about 45 minutes away from Las Vegas, and I spent every moment I could with him and tried to hold his hand through it all. And he refused chemo. He was very strong and didn't want to appear weak to anybody. And all of us are saying, just please do something to help yourself. And we actually lost him about 2 months later. So we had one last Christmas with him, and then he was gone. So for me, all that guilt that I had felt, for one, disappointing him when he was here and not joining the Masons, and two, just not feeling like I saw him enough, was all coming to a handstand right there. And I just didn't know what to do. So I stopped going to work. I stopped going outside of my house. I stopped talking to my friends. I stopped doing much of anything except for lay on my couch, and then at night I'd go upstairs and lay in my bed. And when you're going through something like this where your world stops, and I'm sure all of you know this, time doesn't mean anything anymore. It's just one day blending into the next, 1 hour blending into the next hour. Everything's gray, everything's fuzzy, everything's blurry. It doesn't really make any sense. And so after about 2 weeks of this, I lost my job. What employer would keep me? I didn't come in anymore. I lost all of my friends except for one friend. And he came over and I answered the door, and I didn't really pay him much mind because my mind just wasn't, my brain wasn't in the game. I didn't really care about having friends at that time. It was just thinking about what I had done and what I had done wrong and what I had said to my grandfather in his dying last moments. And it was very, very difficult. And my friend looked around my house and he looked at my windows, and I had all the windows open and I had dryer sheets and all of the cutouts. And if that sounds a little bizarre, it's absolutely bizarre. It is. There's no getting around it. And to me, it was cleansing the spirits of the house. It was cleansing the house and making sure that everything smelled okay and looked okay, because I didn't know what I was doing. And so he looked at the windows and he goes, "Are you okay, man? Like, that doesn't seem right." And I remember freaking out a little bit and just looking at him and said, I need the house clean. I need it to be clean in here. And he looked at me and he left. And to me, that was very eye-opening, because I lost my last friend. He didn't understand me anymore, and I didn't understand myself. So in an effort to start understanding myself again, I started painting pictures. I started drawing self-portraits with watercolor. And every day I would draw another self-portrait. They could look different from day to day, because we don't look the same every day in our heads. Sometimes our feet are too big. Sometimes our nose is too long. Sometimes our hair doesn't look right. Sometimes our breath is funky. Like, we just don't look right in our heads. And so after weeks of just doing these self-portraits every day and seeing the different stages of just where my mental health was, and not even realizing that I was suffering from depression, because I come from a very stoic family that doesn't talk about these things. We just sweep it under the rug and everything's all right. I started realizing I'm not okay. And in that moment, I started painting a gold leaf paper that I had found weeks prior at a thrift store. And it was this, or months earlier, and this really great frame. And so I took it and I was like, I'm gonna paint this today. I wanna do something out of my comfort zone. And so I took it outside in this little side area I had at the house at the time. And I just remember looking at it and just wanting to make something that was beautiful. And so I was looking at this gold leaf paper, and then next thing you know, split second, I'm on the ground, my hands are bloody, and I don't know how I got there. And I look at the picture, and there's a purple monster looking at me with a maniacal grin with words around it saying, "You're worthless, you're a loser, nobody will love you." And I had apparently punched the frame after I had finished it, and I have no recollection of that. And that's when everything started falling into place, and I realized, okay, I can't do this. This is not how I can live my life anymore. And so I started going outside of the house a little bit. I started going to coffee shops. I started trying to just assimilate myself back into society any way that I could. I would have a coffee with my headphones on and not talking to anybody, but at least I was outside of my house and I wasn't on my couch. And I just started feeling more normal again, but I would still go back to my house and just lay around all day, or just focus on nothing and just stare into the darkness. And one day I started painting a self-portrait, and this fuzzy little Yeti came out, and it happened to be this guy right here. And I looked at him and I said, that's exactly how I'm feeling. The eyes encapsulated everything, and everything, I got this warm feeling all over my body. I said, this is Yerman. And I had no idea why that name came into my head, but I used to write these poems for these depressed monsters I was drawing, and right away the poem came about that said, Yerman was a forest dweller, Yerman was a beast. Yerman was a sad feller, Yerman was deceased. And at the time, it was very dark because that's how I was feeling, and I didn't want to live. I had no intention of living. I didn't look forward to the next day. There was nothing that I was looking forward to. And I realized that that wasn't a dark sentiment. It was a feeling of rebirth, because my Yerman had found closure, and I started healing, and I started realizing, okay, there is something to look forward to. There's life to look forward to. And so I put every Yerman shirt that we make now has that poem on the inside, on the lapel, just to remind me mostly where it all came from, and hopefully it can inspire others to just realize that in your darkest moments, there's always a tomorrow, and there's always something to look forward to. I wish I could stand up here and tell you that I've figured it out and I'm not depressed anymore, but I've gone through dark times up until 2 months ago, and I'm still going through them. It's like a wave, and I feel like when my grandfather passed, I didn't have the necessary tools. I was in a sea being crashed over with waves of depression, and all I had was a life jacket, and I was just trying to stay above water. I was just trying to breathe. And now that I see a therapist every week, I now realize that it's a ship we're all on, and we're all captains of our own ship. And even though those waves can still come, there's still those bright days, and we're still floating along in the sea. And as long as you have those tools necessary, you can deal with it in a much healthier way. As far as next steps, I don't know, but I know that I'm gonna survive, and it's gonna be with this guy right here, so that's all I can look forward to.